Hi, this is Phil from Simply Rhino, and in this short video I'd like to take a look at getting Rhino data into Twinmotion using the new Datasmith translator. Here I'm using Rhino 7 and Twinmotion 2021.1.3, and for the purposes of this video I'm using the Windows platform. Twinmotion is an architectural visualization tool from which you can create still images, panoramas, video and VR from your Rhino data. Twinmotion is easy to use and learn and is modestly priced. Once your Rhino data is inside Twinmotion, it's easy to add materials, animated people and vehicles, trees and vegetation, and it's also easy to change location, season and weather, all with simple slider-based controls. So, to download the Datasmith plugin, we need to go to the Unreal Engine website. I'll put the address in the description below and also on the screen. But this is an Unreal plugin and not a Twinmotion specific plugin. If we scroll down the page and go to the Rhino Exporter, this shows the old exporter here. So what we need to do is to go to the preview version. So it's Unreal Engine 4.27 Windows Preview. Or Mac, of course, if you're on that platform. And download the file from here. This plugin will export Rhino data either into Twinmotion or Unreal. And the idea is that, going forward, you can use your data in Twinmotion, for example, to create a simple VR exercise, and then, if you go beyond the limits of Twinmotion, you can very easily move that data to Unreal. Once we've downloaded the installer, we can double-click to run, select Rhino 7 and finish. It's always a good idea to restart your machine after installing a plugin. If we open Rhino after installing the plugin, we should see a new tab called Datasmith, and this will have 4 buttons: Synchronize, Connections, Export 3D View and Messages. This is the Rhino model that we're going to bring into Twinmotion, and first, many thanks to Othmane Kandri for the use of this model. Ott is an architect who uses Rhino and Grasshopper, and this model is a personal project called Hybrid Pavilion. First, we need to consider some important things in the model. The units need to be set to meters, as in this case, or inches. And it makes sense to organize the model as we normally would do in Rhino, making use of layers and sublayers so that we can turn on or off various parts of the model in Twinmotion just as we would do in Rhino. We can use blank layers in Rhino as a folder for sublayers, and this methodology is recognized in Twinmotion. Once inside Twinmotion, we can rearrange existing layers and create new layers or containers as they're called in Twinmotion. I've applied materials to the geometry inside of Rhino, and if I switch to rendered view and look at some of the parts in here, you'll see that we've got several materials here that are all applied to various parts of the model. The default proposition in Twinmotion is that materials are replaced globally. What I mean by this is that if in Rhino all of the elements of this hexagonal lattice structure have the same material applied to them, then, once inside of Twinmotion, if I use the picker to select one hexagonal component and change the material, then the material for all of the lattice structure will update accordingly. Let's now look first at using Export 3D View to take this Rhino geometry into Twinmotion. So if I go to Export 3D View and then navigate to a destination, this will write out a U-Datasmith file. And you'll see that this is written out fairly quickly. Next, I open up the Epic Games launcher and launch Twinmotion. Once inside Twinmotion, I can import my Datasmith file from here. So I'll navigate to the file, and in the options, instead of Collapse by Material, I can choose Keep Hierarchy, which will preserve our Rhino layer structure. UV texturing is handled from Rhino. So if you have specific UV mapping requirements, then do this in Rhino before exporting. You may find it useful to use a dummy texture to set the mapping. The units will convert one-to-one unless we disable the auto setting here, and then we can set the value manually. Hitting OK will now bring in our Rhino geometry. If I open up the right-hand side panel, I'll see the various Rhino layers, or containers as they're called in Twinmotion. Unlike Rhino, however, I'll see all the separate geometry elements. Each of the meshes for the hex shading, or each of the B-reps, solids and surfaces, for the plaza. A very quick tip, which is the equivalent of zoom selected in Rhino, is to go to the top level, which is Hybrid Pavilion, and just type F. This will zoom to the extents of the whole of the Rhino model, and we'll now see our model is sitting inside our Twinmotion world. Twinmotion uses a pivot that is similar to the Rhino gumball, and using the Rhino navigation mode in Twinmotion, Alt plus right mouse button orbits around the pivot. So if I select a single object rather than the whole scene and hit F, I can now zoom to that object and orbit around it. If I zoom out again, you'll see that I have a brick texture on some of the terrain components. This is an example of a dummy texture that I mentioned earlier. In Rhino, I grouped several terrain surfaces together and then applied a planar mapping to them. If I now open up the panel on the left-hand side and go to Materials, and then Ground, and then Nature, for example, I can drag a grass texture onto here, and you'll see that each of these elements will have the same mapping. The mapping is, just like Rhino, independent of the material, so the grass texture is now applied consistently across these surfaces. If I go to the hex shading container, or layer here for example, and hit F, you'll see that the elements in here can be independently moved, and this is something that was difficult to do with the old direct link method. So if I wanted to move, for example, this element here, then all of these other concrete elements would come with it. So likewise, if I go to open up the hex shading here and try and select one of the elements, then I can move individual elements separately from their material binding. Let's now take a look at the Datasmith direct link. So to start with, here I have both Rhino and Twinmotion open. If I go to Import inside of Twinmotion, this time I'll use direct link rather than geometry. And I'll see here the Rhino file that I have open. If I have more than one Rhino file open, or indeed any other programs that Twinmotion will support, I'll see the files in this list here. I'll choose the Rhino file from the list, and then I'll see the options Collapse by Material or Keep Hierarchy. But other than that, I'll have less import options here than when we use the Geometry option. I'll choose Keep Hierarchy and hit OK, and this will process the direct link and the geometry will come into Twinmotion as before. There may be some confusion with the terminology here, but when we choose direct link, as in this example, we're actually using the new Datasmith translator under the hood. Now, if your geometry doesn't come in when you link the file, just use the Synchronize button here and that will push the geometry into Twinmotion. I'm just going to collapse the containers here and pick the Pavilion container. Now, if I move to Rhino and do something fairly major, let's take this whole canopy and move it vertically, for example. I can then update the Twinmotion file accordingly by pushing the Synchronize button, and you'll see that my geometry updates here. And if I undo in Rhino and push the geometry again, you'll see that Twinmotion keeps up with Rhino. In Rhino, we can add new objects, delete objects, create new layers, etc., and push these changes to Twinmotion. If I now save the Twinmotion file and then quit both Rhino and Twinmotion, I should then be able to open both these files again and Twinmotion will remake the connection. I can confirm this with the Connections button. So, after you've used Rhino and Twinmotion together, you can save both files and open them up again the following day or week, and as long as you've got both of the files open, the two files will link. One of the cool things about direct linking is that we can link more than one file, and those files can come from different sources. So, for example, we could have a Twinmotion file open that is linked to a Rhino file, a Revit file, and a SketchUp file, and you can work in all of these programs concurrently, pushing geometry to Twinmotion as you go. If I open the Twinmotion file without Rhino, I'll see the link here is showing as being broken. So if I go to Rhino and open up the Hybrid Pavilion file, then you'll see that this re-establishes the link. I'll cover adding Twinmotion assets such as materials, people, vegetation, and looking at how we can change the weather and season, etc. in a separate video. But one thing I do want to make clear is that Twinmotion does have a fairly heavy requirement for hardware. And one of these requirements is that it ideally needs a dedicated video card with 8 GB of RAM. Whilst inside of Twinmotion, I can open up the statistics panel here, and this will show you the frame rate. And I'll see the thumbs up symbol if this is acceptable. The frame rate is of course influenced by the complexity of the geometry. So here, if I turn off the hexagonal structure of the pavilion, the frame rate will increase. To give you an idea of the setup that I'm using here, this is a 16-core AMD Ryzen 9 machine with 64 GB of RAM and an 8 GB PNY Quadro RTX 4000 graphics card, and this is giving acceptable results. If I go to Preferences, I can change the quality settings manually or automatically based on the system specifications. Here, the automatic setting will put the quality to Ultra, but I reduced the setting to High to speed up the frame rate whilst I was putting the model together. These settings control the sort of general feedback on the quality that we're seeing in the real-time preview here. And you'll see that when I move from High to Ultra, the frame rate dropped. I'll also see feedback on GPU and CPU usage in the statistics panel. So that's about the end of what I wanted to cover in this video. Thanks for watching, and please feel free to leave any comments below. If you found this video useful, then please hit the like button, and remember that to keep up with the latest developments in Rhino, then you can subscribe to this channel. At Simply Rhino, we offer training for Rhino and all its key plugins, so check out our website for more details. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch up with you in the next video.